Hello, listeners, and welcome back to a new episode of the Cult Vault podcast. I'm your host, Kacey, and as usual, I do have to plug my favourite event of the year before we jump into the episode. CrimeCon UK is taking place this year in London on the 3rd and 4th of October. Part education, part advocacy, part discovery. It's the ultimate true crime event. And you can experience the true crime genre like you've never experienced it before. There are world-renowned experts, fascinating deep dives, and raw, honest conversation. It's always a brilliant time to meet new people and catch up with friends. If you're interested in taking part in the biggest UK true crime event of the year, you can find your tickets today at www.crimecon.co.uk, and you can use the code CULT, C-U-L-T, for a 10% discount at the checkout, or follow the link in the episode description. Now on to the show. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Cult Vault podcast. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different, but I think that the listeners will find it equally as interesting as the normal content that I deliver on the podcast. I'm joined today by Adam and Mike, and I'm going to ask you both to introduce yourselves to the listeners. Adam, would you like to go first?
Yeah, super nice to meet you. My name's Adam Burke. I'm an actor and a filmmaker. We just put out a film called Wet Paper Bag, and it has a setting in a cult environment, and I'm super excited to dig into this just because I know a little bit about your background, Kacey, and everything that I've read online. It sounds like there's a lot of really cool parallels to the story that we made.
Yeah, I think so. I'm really looking forward to diving into the nice psychological parts of Wet Paper Bag. There are many. Hi, Mike. Welcome to the show. Would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yes, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I am a actor in the Midwest of the States. I'm a father, and I have been doing this type of work all of my years. I used to be involved in the nonprofit sector and working with different initiatives there, but have found myself in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is where I got to meet Adam and Judd and get involved with this wonderfully ridiculous project. But yeah, I got to look at your background a little bit too, and I'm have a few questions for you.
I mean, if you want to interview me, that's fine.
I feel like that is what's going to happen.
So I guess, as we were expecting Judd today and we have Mike, I will throw out the questions and either of you can pick them up as you see fit on who is best to answer, or you can both answer. And I'll just start by asking if you can set up the premise of the film Wet Paper Bag in your own words.
Sure, I can. I was the screenwriter, so I can set a little context to it. I think a more interesting way to approach this is to tell you how the film started. Judd is the co-director, co-producer. He wasn't able to make it today, but a brilliant guy. And he came up to me and he said, if we're making a feature film, we've got to make something that is contained. And I love the idea about a couples retreat center. And, I thought about it a little bit. And I went back to a story that I had from a woman that I'd met, and we decided to make it a little bit darker and a little bit more in the vein of there being a cult involved. And the reason for that is because with any great story, it's got to be something that people can relate to. And not everybody has obviously been in a cult, but a lot of people have been in relationships and been in situations where they're taken advantage of, and not just blatantly taken advantage of, but 1 inch at a time. 1 inch at a time, to the point where all of a sudden they're in the situation that they feel like they can't escape. And so we felt that there could be a great premise there for a slow burn psychological thriller where these people are coerced into this type of relationship that they just eventually feel like they can't get out of. And that's essentially the premise of the film. But I'll let Mike, who's eloquent with words and one of the leads in the movie, do his damage here, because I know he could probably say this better than me.
No, that was pretty wonderful, Adam. Yeah, Judd was going to be here and let me know yesterday he was not able to be present, but Judd and Adam got to know each other, and both of them had this project kind of ruminating in their minds and in their lives. And it was a very unique happening where you get these paths that cross, and in the arts that can usually lead to some very interesting alleyways. And that's what took place with these guys. I knew Judd beforehand. Judd is actually an attorney in the cities, and he got to know Adam and said, "There's this guy you have to meet this guy, Adam." I was like, "Oh, I don't know," and so I ended up going. I was hung over to some coffee meeting with these guys, and right away I could see why Judd was insistent about me meeting Adam. We got to talking right away, and we all have our own lives, but we managed to kind of sort out a lot of our deeper thoughts and our interest in cinema. And I think that the topic of, yes, trauma, types of characters that come along that can take advantage of people that have gone through trauma, things that we've all kind of dealt with in our own lives, came together in this piece. They asked me to play a central character in it, a nuclear pharmacist named Don Haberman, who is the cult leader, so to speak, and he runs a wellness center in the middle of the woods, and trying to help couples heal their relationships, or at least that's the story on the front end. But yes, like I was saying, together we managed to have a conversation with ourselves that was a lot about the darker things that can happen with manipulation.
Yeah, you did play a cult leader as well. And when I say you played a cult leader, like you played a cult leader, it was the hair and everything. I mean, I see remnants of the hair there. And sometimes people ask, is it a wig? So I want to ask that question because I don't know if it was.
No, it was not a wig. I have been known I will cut my hair down really short and then let it grow out. And then I'm just kind of a lazy guy that way, and let it, once it gets a little too ridiculous. And they caught me when I was in a pretty lengthy stage of life. And my hair went white when I was a younger guy. So that kind of lends itself to, is this guy got both oars in the water? But I actually, strangely enough, in one scene, which I, of course, noticed, we had wrapped the film, and I was like, okay, is it okay to cut my hair now? Like, yeah, go ahead. So I did. I cut my hair down, but they're like, oh, we need to do one more scene. So they had to get this wig. And wanted to ask you, could you tell when I was wearing a wig in that?
Do you know what? I think I know which part you're talking about, but because it wasn't linear, I think it made sense. Are you talking about like the flashback scene?
Yeah. No, that was my hair. They had actually just like sprayed it very dark.
Then I don't know which part you mean. So
Not
there
bad,
you go,
Adam.
convincing
Not bad,
wig.
not bad for the old boys. That's good. But yeah, there was a part where I show up and I've got a wig on, and we had a woman go through a heck of a time trying to make it look like my hair, because I got a little bit of a strange do.
In terms of depicting like a psychedelic wellness retreat, psychedelic cults, psychotherapy cults, these are all things that are in existence. So when I was watching the film, I've heard people, survivor stories, people that have come onto the show to share their experiences about these types of settings. So we know that those types of environments do exist. But when it came to depicting a cult on screen, what drove you, Adam, to write a screenplay based around a psychedelic wellness retreat? Or is it based on the friend's story that you heard?
To give you a little background on that, so I started screenplay writing when I was in prison. So I did about almost 4 years in prison, and when you're there, you see a lot of just wild things, and you you're under the guise of these guards, these people that, kind of get off on treating you as less than, but you're also around a lot of people that have these incredible life stories. And so you start collecting those. I got visited by a woman for a while who was in a relationship that she just couldn't seem to get out of, and it was an abusive relationship. And she had a young daughter, and eventually she was able to break free from that and start her life over and give her daughter a whole new life. And it was this beautiful story, but while she was in the midst of it, she just felt like there was no way out. And so I think that was really the kernel that started the thought process of, this is somebody who could just walk out the door, right? Could just get in her car and leave, but it's never that simple. It's never that easy to just start your life over and just to move on. And so there's a line at the end of the movie that says that just because it's familiar doesn't mean it's worth fighting for. And I think that that's something that we all have to go through in some point in our life, where we have to reinvent, we have to recreate. And coming out of prison, I knew that I had to recreate. I knew I had to start over. I couldn't go back to the job that I had. I couldn't go back to the career that I had. And so filmmaking was always something that I had wanted to get involved with. And when Judd and I decided to make a feature film, and he proposed the idea of, a couples retreat center, as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, you need to make sure that it's visually arresting. It's got to be something that people can lose themselves in this world, right? And so we kicked around the idea of it being, using these psychedelic medications, but it also had to have a psychological manipulation factor that allowed people to feel uncomfortable, and then that uncomfortableness to be amplified by, the sound and the visuals that they're experiencing through the actors' performances of people being on these types of medications. So as far as like where the idea came from, it was the loose amount of research that I did around things like Jonestown and the real life situations that are out there. And we're not experts. We want to make that very clear. Our heart goes out to people that have been in those situations. And I think any good story has the ability for interpretation, for everyone to kind of hopefully see a bit of themselves in that situation, in that story, whether it's relating to one character or multiple characters. And that's really what we tried to create here, was a story that at some point people can resonate with what's happening and see a bit of themselves and start thinking about how that, maybe is a piece of their life in one way or another.
Your story about, collecting stories whilst being in prison is, I think, interesting on its own. You should make a feature film around that experience, because I imagine that there would be a lot to tell on screen around that sort of environment. And I have spoken to people that have been through the prison system or worked in the prison system in the UK and in America, and there are so many culty elements to the different parts of being in that environment, and in the arts as well, Mike. I don't know if you've experienced this, but the arts can be very culty. So cults are everywhere.
Yes, very, very much so. I ran a public access television station for many years, and that's not to say that that's exactly a cult environment, but the fact that you can get many people from many walks of life all under the same roof suddenly, and these people are being guided, maybe by a warden or maybe by a cult leader or what, not to say that those are just one and the same, but just that they are to fall under a command of sorts and to be assembled underneath them in some sense. Yeah, there is a lot of danger to it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And I think what you've mentioned is so important around how we might not necessarily look at an abusive family environment or an abusive relationship and think, wow, that shares these same controlling elements of a cult. But that's something we talk about so much on the podcast. And I think that's depicted really well in Wet Paper Bag, not that that kind of really, I always say this, but the really unhelpful sentiment of why didn't you just leave? When somebody is speaking to another person in an abusive relationship, or somebody that's managed to escape one, and they say, why didn't you just leave? And it does show all of those different elements of why you can't, make a clean break in controlling environments. So that was part of the film that really stood out to me. And in the press kit, you mentioned that the film is built directly from current exit literature. So I wondered, Adam, if you could talk us through the research you've mentioned you did when putting this piece together.
Yeah, like I said, it was loose, and I didn't really save all the articles. I just I used Google, obviously, and just devoured as much of this type of information as I could, so that hopefully we would have a conversation with somebody like yourself who has a master's in this and wrote your dissertation, and not have made something that feels cheap or insensitive. And I hope that we did that, and I guess testament that we're here today. Hopefully we accomplished that. I don't have a list of sightings, but there's just so much information out there, and whether it's YouTube videos that I watched or articles that I read, and using it as inspiration to make sure that the story has enough elements of truth to it that hopefully it does resonate with people. And like I said, carefully trying to walk that razor's edge where we're not in any way hopefully being insensitive to people that have gone through something like this.
And I think that's really important. I've written in my interview questions that we talk a lot about ethical content creation whilst discussing coercive control on the podcast. What was your process whilst writing and directing some of the scenes in making sure that you make something, it's fictional, right? So something entertaining and something that's kind of aesthetically pleasing and draws the viewer in, and the sound is amazing, but also kind of remembering that some people have had similar experiences to what you're depicting on screen. And that razor's edge you've mentioned, how did you go through that process?
Well, Mike was a big help in this, and that's why he has an assistant producer credit. At one point, the script was close enough, or the screenplay was close enough to where we started casting. And we knew Mike was going to be involved with this project from the beginning. And since you've seen the movie, he plays a very, very difficult character to act. And so trying to cast that character would have been a nightmare. It would have been so difficult. And knowing that we had Mike as kind of our secret weapon in the back pocket, I was able to write a character that was, hugely, somebody who was magnetic, and you just wanted to be around them. You wanted to be their friend. You wanted them to compliment you, but at the same time, they had this very dark, vile secret that they kept locked away. And somebody that, I think from everything that I've read is very much in the vein of a cult leader. They're not people that are despicable on the surface. They're people that are, I think, generally very likable. And so we knew that Mike could play that role. The rest of the characters and the development of them, at a certain point, we had what's called a table read. So that's where you get actors together and you go around and everybody has their script and they're performing as the best that they can their first time reading through the material. But you're hearing those words come to life, and you're hearing those characters start to have breath put into them. And I think that at that point we started recognizing, this is something that has emotional weight to it, and it makes you feel, it makes you uncomfortable, it makes you squirm, but it didn't seem disrespectful, And so I think that was probably the moment that we knew that we were on the right track, was at the table read.
The actors are all incredible. Each character felt really fleshed out, but also relatable. Like, it is somebody that you could just walk past in the street and be like, oh, I've met that person, or I am that person, or parts of each character were familiar, at least to me. So I think that shows great screenplay writing and great execution on the parts of those involved. So congratulations on that front.
Thank you. And thank you on behalf of the entire cast. I mean, this is a very low budget indie film. So to create something of this production value for the amount of money that we had, it required these people who are extremely talented to put their art on display at the highest level and do it for, a small amount of money. And so we were very fortunate. Every single person that acted in this did, like you said, just an outstanding job.
So, Mike, how do you prepare yourself to play somebody like Don Haberman? Because I can't imagine that it's a role you just step into and feel like, unless you're like that in everyday life, and I can't imagine you are, you step into that role and think, this feels really comfortable, like a second skin. How do you go about preparing for that role?
Well, I'm not exactly method. Almost. I start to kind of fall into a state of being before going into a project where I am starting to think a certain way and starting to, when I do projects, which yes, can often be for minimal amounts of money, it's a lot about the therapy of it and getting to go into somebody else's life and thoughts, but apply some of my own issues that I have and maybe embellish them a little bit. But through the process, when it is a script like this, come out with something that is pretty cathartic. And so with Dawn, I did a light amount of research with Dave Koresh and have some workings with what happens with those poor folks, Heaven's Gate, and the Jonestown Massacre, and learning about some of these character types, but also kind of learning about some of the utilizations of like sacred sexuality, I guess, that is applied and utilized sometimes, unwittingly, just by the nature of the beast. But I looked at Don and the trauma that had befell him in his past, and the way that he had grown a very skewed way of dealing with it internally, quietly, and the way that would also be a hushed, a quieted perversion of sorts that was able to, be a receptacle for his hurt and his anger and everything in one spot. That of course, yes, you can utilize drugs and alcohol. Don to me was a little bit of that he imbibed it. He was he was a gluttonous bastard, so to speak. But he used everything he could to try to dull the pain, but so much of it he did not deal with the right way, so it became an outward projection, and that he did not care that much about the people that were going to be in his path to be able to deal with the pain of the past. And I think that coupling that with what I've come to learn about people that can, hate to use the word, ascend to cult leader positions of power, that ability to not worry about the subjects when it is them dealing with their own pain, their own anger. And so I became, in my preparation, probably a worse friend than I normally am, like towards Adam and Judd. And I became much more, loose, and I became a little bit more of a jerk, and didn't care about them. And through that, I got to learn about how I actually do care about these guys. But I think I did become very slovenly in my my relationships, and as I entered into it. And so that when I went to this place in the middle of the woods with this team to shoot this thing over the course of 10 days, I had worked myself out of relationships and got myself in a place where I am now in the woods alone and I need nobody. I'm an island, and so I became kind of isolated and felt in my mind that I was quietly the one in control, and these people were, maybe not beneath me, but not worth any of the pain and suffering that I would have if I gave them any credence mentally or emotionally.
There was one moment on set that floored everybody, and it's the river scene, and it's a flashback scene back to when Don Haberman did have a cult that was active, and we had all these extras, and a lot of them had never been on a movie set before. And so we have this scene where Mike's character is rushing down this hill into the water and grabbing a child, and it's extremely emotional, and these people are gathering around, and Judd and I are standing in the river, filming this thing. And we have one take because we don't have the budget for a wardrobe change. We don't have the daylight for the time to be able to make another one happen. So we have one take, and the emotional gravity that Mike and Amber and the whole team brought to this scene, these extras that have never been on a movie set before were crying, and it's captured in that moment. Later that day, after we had wrapped, we all went and grabbed a bite to eat, just Judd and I think Jared and Mike and I, and we're sitting there and we're just talking about the day. We're talking about things that happened. We're complimenting Mike on the performance, and there was a moment of silence, and all of a sudden Mike just started to weep, and it was just this like overwhelming emotional response to where he went. And so, I think that's the cost of these types of performances is there's a demand that these actors put on themselves to go places that are very, very uncomfortable, sometimes very, very dark, and to get that performance that you feel sitting on your couch, it requires something of these people.
Yeah.
How do you come out of that then, Mike? You know, when you're finished with the project, or the project's winding down, and you've talked about kind of isolating yourself and getting yourself into this place to play this role, how do you come out of the other end of that? Or does some of it linger with you for a while, or maybe forever?
I'm still in it. No, I have the feeling, like Adam had said when we were out to dinner, there is a physical things, and I had to explain to them that a large part of that was, my body was simply reacting at this point with everything, and it was a physical reaction, of course, very mental at the same time. But when I came out of this particular project, it was like being locked in a car, having a bad acid trip, and having to go through all this, the pain and suffering, and having to sweat it out until when the light hit in the morning, I felt like I did kind of like fall out of the car onto the dirt road, at the music festival, and like, oh, thank God I'm alive. But I felt like I did get through it, and something was lifted from me, and things took its place. And I think that working with people and growing and crying and having some of that pain unpacked, the onion unpeeled, getting down to some of the core things is extremely important, but it's about how you redress it and about how you build it back up. And through the process of filmmaking, I have found that that's a very healthy thing to do with like a group therapy, and coming out of that, where I now, Judd and Adam, know a large part of my pain that I carried, and have helped me set a part of that down. You never really fully let go of all of it, but you can redress the wound a bit, and have a little bit of help carrying it after back. And so I deal with it with a little help from my friends.
I have a question about the psychology of Don Haberman. Maybe you can give us some insight into this, Mike. People always ask me, did that cult leader always plan to lead a cult or build a cult? And sometimes in the history of certain cult leaders, you can find an isolated traumatic event, or you can find a series of traumatic events in childhood that maybe explain the type of behavior that person goes into exhibiting as a teenager or an adult. And some people will speculate that maybe that's the cause. Some people will say they had no idea it would be a cult. Some people say, they were sexually depraved and they wanted to target vulnerable people, and this is how they did it. I wonder what your thoughts are around Don Haberman as a cult leader. Did he always have this in him? Is it the trauma he experienced that led him into becoming what he becomes? Maybe it's a mixture of all of them. This is the thing we'll never know about cult leaders, but what does your intuition say about his character?
I think that it's never so simple where that, like you had said, it's most likely a combination of many things. You know, what begat what? Was it the symptom that gave way, you know, to the trauma response? What was it, the condition? To me, I think that latent narcissism, you know, can usually be a factor where those things are already in place from just the way that upbringing has happened, or maybe there's a little bit of some physiological, you know, where they're genetically predisposed to some of these things. I know within my own family, I've had to carry the burdens of some of the core responses that, you know, some of the mental illnesses and some of the things that are just baked in already. And I think Don has I think he's got a family history here. And I never think it's as simple as somebody thought they were going to be cute and build an army of people and made this big plan. I think that all the factors of a painful existence lead to that. I think that it's important that when we examine it, we don't boil it down to just one simple standing factor. But I do think, going back to some of my original thing, I think narcissism does have an existing notable pattern throughout. Anyways, sorry about that long-winded answer, but
don't apologize. That was it was fascinating to get some insight into the process of how you think about all of these things, and it was a wonderful response. So thank you, Mike. Please don't ever apologize. Adam, you starred in the production, you wrote the film, and you filmed parts of it. How did you prepare for the role? You talked about having a limited budget. Did you just throw yourself in there? I mean, you were really convincing. When I looked up your picture, I was like, oh my gosh, he's also in the film. The guy that I'm going to be interviewing is also in the film. And so I wonder, did you say like, oh, I'll play a role because we have a small budget? Or were you thinking, I wrote the script, I know this guy's character, I can do this great?
When I was in prison, there was COVID had happened, and there was a moment when I looked around and everybody really had their head hanging extra low because of COVID, all of our visitation rights were gone for over a year, and nobody had seen their families. And there was a lot of people that were leaving but not coming in. So the community, if you will, was getting smaller, and people were getting more frazzled and frayed, and it was just an extremely uncomfortable situation. We were trapped inside and you know, locked down for a long time. I was starting to screenwrite at this point. I've written a number of screenplays or shorts, excuse me. And I got the ear of one of the guards who I, you know, got along with. And I said, hey, we have this theater. Christmas is coming up. Would you be willing to go to the captain and just see if there's any possible way that we could use the theater and put on a holiday play? And never thought in a million years it would happen, but he came back and said, yeah, we can make that work if you can get, you know, all these things on board. So I was able to write a 3-act play, and we had musical acts in between. I was able to cast it all. I played, you know, guitar as part of the instrumental in between. I played one of the characters in the play. And at the end of the play, there was a moment when I stood up with the cast, and the whole audience was on their feet applauding. And that was a moment where, you know, it completely changed the entire environment. The atmosphere felt lighter. People just felt, you know, people had cookies afterwards and cider. And it was just kind of like, it took people's minds away from what was the reality for a moment. And so, yeah, I think that was the moment that I knew I wanted to get into acting as well. So when I got out, I was in the halfway house, and I took an acting class, and my coach, my acting instructor said, hey, you should go audition for this thing. Well, I got it, and 6 months after I was out of prison, I was like a mile from the prison playing a police officer in a squad car, driving down the road with an actress crying in the back seat, a camera guy here, a camera guy back here, a drone, you know, a follow car with the director. And I'm just like, holy shit, like this is such a surreal, unbelievable type situation. So yeah, when we started putting this together, I knew I wanted to be one of the characters, and I love acting. I think that's I enjoy that as much as or more than the other aspects of filmmaking. But yeah, acting is a huge thing, and that's one of the things that Mike and I get along with so well. Is we do a lot of auditions together, and when you're performing, when you're acting, if you're performing along, if your acting partner is somebody that is fully in it, it's so much easier for you to step in it, because acting really is just this you're reacting to that person. And so if they're giving you everything, you're giving them everything, and it elevates both performances. So yeah, that was the thought process behind this. It wasn't an afterthought. It was something that I wanted to be a part of.
Right. And there's a tense scene between when it's just the two of you left at the dinner table. There's a tense scene between the two of you. How was that? Like, was it strange? Do the rest of the cast stay around to watch those scenes happen? Or is it really intimate where it's you two having this tense exchange?
Mike, I don't know if I remember. I think that it was late at night. I think it was a pretty small cast at that point.
I think we sent the children to bed, and we sat up at the table and had a very terse conversation. But yeah, as I remember, it was where everybody was able to be excused. It was time. I think it was 2 a.m. or something like that, and everybody had a long day, and we knew that Adam and I had to do this scene at the end, so we kind of let everybody go, get ready for bed while Mom and Dad had a stern conversation. But I really do love that scene. And Adam, that, not to try to find a through line, but there is, there's a very unique through line with the what Adam was saying about actors and how you can, if they're going to give their all, it's going to bring that out of you. And I think there's something unique, since we're on the subject, that, with cult and cult family and things like that, that there's a quite a unique correlation that at least popped into my mind when you were talking about that. So that did, when we were all together in this and doing that scene, it is really something that group thought, when you get together to do something and you go all the way, we go to some very amazing places and terrible places.
There are lots of scenes where everybody is around the table together. So are there any things that you can give us insight into and how that differed? When was it very different having everyone around the table at one time compared to when it was just the two of you?
If there's any screenplay writers out there, don't write table scenes. They're so hard to shoot. Those, some of those dinner scenes that are just a few minutes long took hours and hours and hours, because you're capturing the exact same dialogue from every angle and multiple angles, sometimes for the same character. And the fact that everybody had to be able to respond at their highest level, and we didn't have a lot of time to reshoot everything. Again, just a huge shout out to the whole cast. Everybody did an incredible job. That second scene, I will say, the second dinner scene where it's very tense, and Mike he's playing, he's kind of lost it, and he's physically shaking, and he slams his hand on the table. Mike, you must have done that 30 times, and he brought this. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do. He brought this level of intensity. You must have soaked through your shorts 100 times, but this. And that allowed for all of the reaction shots. Even when the camera's not on him, we know that he's performing at this level, which allows for the reaction shots from the other performers to be elevated, to be able to respond in an appropriate way. So that's probably the biggest piece of insight as far as a shoot like that, where you're around a table, is just everybody staying in that moment for that long of a period of time. And it did become grating. Somebody would drop a line, somebody would be goofing around, somebody would check their phone, and it would just, people started getting pretty at each other's throats towards the end a little bit there. So, that's part of filmmaking.
there is a young person in the movie. I don't know if they are actually young in real life, because some people just look a lot younger than they are. And I think he plays a really central figure and kind of pulls everything together. I don't know if you, I mean, I'm trying not to give too much away, but I would like to know the process around protecting that young person around such dark themes, because there is so much depicted throughout the film. There's so many different traumas and so many different things explored in relationships, families, group psychology, colleagues, parent-child relationships, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband cheating with girlfriend, and friendships and siblings and all sorts of things. So how did you go about protecting, I suppose, everyone's mental health, not just those of young people involved, but I think young people especially aren't even allowed to go to the cinema to watch the types of themes depicted in the film?
That's a great question. So Carter Monahan is his name, and he's got he's been acting since he was like 8 years old. In this film, I think he had a birthday right around one of the shoot days. I think he turned 14. He's like 13, 14 while he was on set. The idea of the film is it was paramount that we had somebody that age, because that's such a critical age of change and identity and discovering yourself. And it's such an anchoring age for where a lot of these things can become a part of the rest of your life. And so you're right, even though he doesn't have a lot of dialogue, his character was very very instrumental to the entire story. It really a very central part of the story. Mike actually introduced Judd and I to Carter, and we met his mom, who's just an amazing person. And so again, when I wrote this, I was hoping that he was going to be available to do this, because he's got like this Stranger Things cool look to him, but he's a great performer, and he's just a dynamite kid. He's so fun to be on set with. But it's a very adult themed movie. There's just a lot of content that most parents may not allow their kid to be around that. And we sat down with Nikki. She's like, if he wants to do it, I fully support him. We'll just have a lot of conversations about it. And that's what happened. And he was at the table read, and he saw the script in its entirety and did the read with all of us. So he wasn't necessarily on set during some of the like the sex scene. Obviously, we're not going to have him anywhere near that. But there's moments where he was in the room when it was uncomfortable, and he felt that probably way more than the rest of us, just because of his age. But he handled it like a champ, and then he was able to come out of it, I think, because he was surrounded by people who were all very supportive of each other. And and Mike, he looks to Mike as a big brother, a fatherly type figure, I guess, and he really looks up to him. So I think that had a big piece of it as well. And Mike, you can speak more to this because you know Carter very well.
Yeah, I was just going to say that Nikki, his mother, who Adam had spoken about, was with him at every moment while on set. That she was present for him, and so she probably had a harder time dealing with some of the subject matter. But we always, after we were done, I would at least me, I would razz him a little bit and make sure you're okay, you're doing all right, try to get him back on a little bit of a lighthearted note. But as Adam had alluded to, he's a consummate professional. He's a very talented actor, and he knew what the job was. And there was a lot of good discussions from Adam and Judd going into it about what it was going to take. And so everybody understood what was happening. But the fact that Nikki was with them gave it, the allowance it needed.
And is there anything, I mean, you've spoken about debriefing together, going out for food and drinks after you've wrapped for a day or wrapped the project. Is there anything else that you would do as a team to make sure that everybody was okay with the kind of darker themes of the project?
I think just a lot of conversations. Judd is a consummate jokester, so he did a great job of keeping the set light, as light as we could. But there was moments when we we wanted the moment to be heavy. And so sometimes staying in that as a performer is easier than trying to jump in and out of that. But it was, there were definitely scenes where we would sit down and talk through the beats and talk through the motivation behind the character and understanding why it's necessary to the project. Because I think that, we didn't want anything to just be gratuitous that was in this film. There was always a heavy driving force to every word. There was a lot of intentionality that went into every piece of dialogue, to every moment, to every look. And we wanted the performers to have an understanding of that. But these are professional performers as well, so they're reading this content and they're putting themselves into this. They're bringing this character to life, and so we wanted to hear from them as well. What are you feeling? Why do you feel like this character has this type of motivation? And everybody just knew it. They knew these characters cold, which shows.
You've talked a bit about this being a budget project. It's such high quality, it's really well made, and I'm wondering if, kind of from an indie filmmaker's perspective, you can let myself and the listeners know what that actually means, because I feel like there must be, in total, the size of the team is probably still pretty significant, and the amount of hours involved from start to finish of the project is probably huge, with the sound and the editing and the effects. And you mentioned the lady sorting the wig, we have makeup and everything like that involved. I'm just wondering if you can give us an idea of the actual size of the project, because when you say budget, we might think like 2 or 3 people, but actually I imagine it still took a lot of people to get the whole thing finished.
The main cast, I think, is 7 people, so it's a little bit more of an ensemble piece. The Judd and I are the 2 directors. We wore a lot of hats, so we helped with, we did the editing, we helped with a lot of the sound. We had an incredible sound engineer. We screwed up a lot of things, because it was our first feature film. So as we screwed things up, we've had to fix them in post-production. And the audio, for example, we found this incredible sound engineer, and that's why it took almost 2 years. It took a little over 1.5 years to get this project finished. If we would have made fewer mistakes, we probably could have done that in a shorter period of time. But this film, if we would have had a normal size cast, crew, would have certainly ran, north of $250,000, maybe $500,000. And we made this for $50,000, which requires, there were days when it was literally Judd, me, and a performer, or, it's like, or 2 performers. I think there was a scene where it was Mike and Megan and Judd and I, and that was the day, just the 2 of us, or the 4 of us. So when you say, well, how small was it? Yeah, it was about as small as you can possibly make it. But that does require learning and wearing a lot of hats. I didn't know anything about VFX. I had to learn a lot of that. We farmed some of it out, but we tried to do as much of it as we could just to save money.
In terms of where people can watch the film, Wet Paper Bag, you mentioned in one of your emails that it is streaming in places. I wonder where people can watch it. Will you tour it to film festivals? What's the plan for your finished project?
Yeah, we had a small theatrical run, so we were in some theaters around the region, and then now it's on a streaming platform. So less than 5% of indie films ever get a distribution deal, and we were able to get one. We actually had multiple offers, which is, I think, just amazing.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and so X4 picked us up, and they pushed us out. So we're now on Amazon. You can find it on Fandango at Home, YouTube Movies, and then it'll be on other streamers as time goes by. But Amazon and Fandango at Home, I think, are the 2 largest, and then YouTube Movies. So yeah,
that's incredible.
And then yeah, you can purchase the actual physical DVD and Blu-ray on I think it's on Amazon and Walmart.
That's amazing. Congratulations. What a huge accomplishment that is for all of you to be able to do that. I mean, so many people come and talk about their self-published memoirs and their own film projects and podcasts and content creation, and it is so difficult to find the type of opportunity that you've had there. So I guess the product speaks for itself.
I hope so. And I would love to hear what some of your takeaways were. I mean, with your background watching this, I maybe this should have been asked right at the beginning, probably, but I know Mike and I are dying to know what were some of the things that really resonated with you.
Oh, the listeners are probably like, don't let her start. I really enjoyed it. It gave me 9 Perfect Strangers mixed with White Lotus vibes. And I was kind of like, as soon as the music would take a certain turn, I was like, oh, something's about to happen here. So that's how I watched it from a TV and film loving individual. In terms of the psychological content explored in the film itself, I think I've mentioned a few of it. I really appreciated how there was a lot of intersectionality between all the different types of relationships that you explored, you know, whether it was between a husband and a wife, or it was between siblings that don't even see each other on screen. There was still such a strong showing of of how complicated our relationships can get with our brothers and sisters, even if they're not physically like in the room with us, or if it's been so long since we've spoken to them. And even just the way that there can be like a hierarchical structure inside a family, and how that gets complicated if there's one person at the top that dictates to all of the other people in the household. All of these different things. I don't know how you did it in 90 minutes, but you did, and it was done so well. And then there was just the other side of it where you're watching the film, you're thinking it's a bit tense, I'm not sure what's going to happen. You see some things at the start and you're trying to piece together how it's going to end. You're like, oh, well, that was the last frame, so how do we get there? And oh, will it happen this way, and will it happen that way? And as you're going through, you're trying to work all of these bits out, and then all of a sudden things just go wild, and I was like, oh no. And then my butt cheeks were clenched while I was watching sort of the last 20-30 minutes of the film. So yeah, I think in terms of the content from a cult education perspective, it is very easy to watch the movie and pick out loaded language that's only used in the cult. Cultivation of fear, which is used to control people within the cultic environment. I think it's easy to look at how it's not as simple as why didn't you just leave? It's also not as simple as saying, well, I would never join a cult. It's lots of different things explored that I think would be interesting from a cult survivor's perspective, but also just from a I don't know much about cults perspective. Although I should preface that with not every cult looks like this,
right?
But some have, and I think that that's important. I really enjoyed the project. And I wasn't expecting Mike to be here today. And when the cult leader's face showed up on screen, I was like, hey, it's the cult leader. So it's been great to chat to you both and kind of dive into the psychology behind the project. Has this inspired you to think more about cult depiction projects down the line for either of you? Mike, are you like, never doing that again? I don't want to go anywhere near it. Or is it something you think you'd be interested in exploring a bit more after this project?
I think the sequel will be pretty interesting. No, I have been excited to stay in the vein with Judd and Adam, where we are now moving towards another project, which he can talk about if he likes. But I would be interested to look further into it. I would, just for my own human experience, like to play it from one of the other people sitting at the table's perspective, or get the chance to be someone, you know, because I've myself wondered about, I didn't think of me and these types of things, and and I have dealt with those things in my own life, but I would like to play some of the other perspectives. Yeah, Adam. say you?
I think that what's really important to me as a writer is to make sure that there is depth to every story, that there's psychology to every story, that there's room for interpretation to every story. So it may not be something that I'm working on that isn't, cult-ish, but I think that the more, I love that you're a psychologist, that was your, you spent so much of your life trying to understand how we process and how we are able to deal with all these traumas in life. I think that as a screenwriter and as somebody that's making movies, that is our job, and our duty is to understand how is this going to impact somebody, or how could it impact somebody if it's told in a certain way that really connects with them on a very guttural level. And so, I don't know if it'll be in the vein of cult, but it's certainly going to be in the vein of psychology and, getting into how people deal with trauma. I think that that's something that everybody can understand and relate to.
Yeah, and I would just add with that even with my child, I am always telling her that cinema, really what movies can do is say something that language falls short of being able to communicate. And I think in the confines of the human experience, being able to bridge the gap and understand why somebody would do the things that they're doing, it has a much broader and a deeper subtext that brings it to a more human understanding, a deep understanding of what's going on with trauma. And I really appreciated what this project has been able to do about speaking to some of the unspeakable.
Yeah, absolutely. I did have to ask, Mike, do you do any audiobook narrating? Because you have a spectacular voice, and I imagine that if I was going to listen to an audiobook at night, then I'd be like, wow, this guy's voice is like really immersive.
I deeply appreciate that. I haven't done much, but I'm definitely open to it. I've heard that a little bit as I get older and I'm decaying a little bit more, but I'm reaching a certain gravelly cadence that is appreciable. So yeah, let's do it.
Well, audiobook narration, maybe that's another feather to add to your cap. So what's next then, Adam? Mike mentioned a project that you're working on. Can you tell us much about it, or is it like under wraps at the moment?
I'm working on 3 right now. They're all very different. A feature film and then also an episodic series. The episodic series is probably the thing that we're closest to start shooting, and that's going to be, it's called Silverbug, and it's going to be a little bit more science fiction, but also with some history, some truth wrapped into it. There was an avionics company out of Canada called Avro, and it has to do with UFOs, and I think that that's very much in the top of mind for our culture right now, with all of the media and news that have come out with, understanding that there are UFOs and no one's denying it at this point. And so what does that mean? And Mike and I are looking at both acting in that, as well as Carter, the kid that was in Wet Paper Bag. And that's going to be a really fun little project, and hopefully that turns into something bigger. I've gotten, it's going to be an episodic, so we'll see. Maybe we go for multiple series with that. It'd be fun.
Wow, that sounds great. You're just trying a little bit of everything. You've done the short stuff, you've done the feature film, now we're going into a series. You just, that's great. Yeah, the Christmas special, a Hallmark movie. Oh my goodness. There's gonna be like one of everything in the genre, and then of course you'll have to also narrate your own audiobook at some point as well. So I think we've really unpacked as much as we can without giving away the entire plot for the feature film Wet Paper Bag that you have both starred in, that Adam, you have written and filmed and sounded and all of the things that you can do with a feature film. My last question to both of you before we wrap up today is that if there is somebody that watches Wet Paper Bag that has been through a high control group environment, whether that be a family situation, a cultic situation, an intimate relationship, maybe all at once, who knows, these things can come about in all shapes and sizes, as we know. if somebody that's experienced that watches this film, what do you hope that they'll take away from the project that you've put together?
Hope. I think that the movie it ends in a very hopeful tone, and that's what I hope that they would take away, is that there is, as scary and awful as it may seem to start over, there's a beautiful life out there that can be recreated. So that's what I would hope that anybody that watches it, regardless of their past, that I hope that they feel that at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
How about you, Mike?
Just that for survivors, that there is a commonality, as much as there is a group that has decided to do this, and they've well, maybe not decided, but been coerced, and they're in this situation, that finding others is part of the ticket out, and having the hard conversation and reaching out to people that you would never think. It happens so much, and there are so many situations that create this cult environment, and there are legitimate cults that happen so often that there is so many survivors that end up on the other side and are ready to receive them. So join that group.
I love that. Both of those messages are very strong messages. I think that's really great. Thank you both so much for your time today. Thank you for giving me an exclusive link to watch the film. I always like to be able to watch things and read things before I chat to people, so it was great to have the opportunity to do that. I will grab some links from you, Adam, to put them in the episode description for places where people can find Wet Paper Bag. And hopefully some of the listeners will go out and have a watch. If you do, get in touch and let me know what you think. I'd love to have a conversation about it. And all that's left for me to say is I appreciate both of you and your time. Thank you so much, Adam and Mike.
Thank you so much. This is a blast. This is we've done a lot of filmmaking podcasts, but this is the first one that was very left field, and I was really looking forward to this. And you delivered. Thank you so much. This is really cool.
Enjoy the rest of your day, both of you. Take care.
Thank you.